Amen. If you got a copy of God's Word, we're going to be in Luke chapter 8 today, and we're going to begin reading in verse number 22. And if you got a smart device or a tablet, we're going to be in the New King James Version, but we all know what has brought us here today. We don't have to talk about the storm because we all know the storm that came. And every one of you have been dealing with storms that you've had to deal with because of the storm that came. But there's no couple that's had to deal with anything more difficult than the couple of Trevor Walker and Carol Ann Glover. Trevor is the son of Jeff and Donna Walker, and they were to be married last night up at Brown Mountain Beach up in Lenore, North Carolina. The wedding party left on Thursday to make their way up there. We were supposed to have a rehearsal dinner on Friday night, and then the storm rolled in on Thursday. Some of the places that they were staying in, the storm that rolled in actually destroyed the houses. They were going to be putting me up in a yurt, and I was really looking forward to it. I mean, my dad's name was Bert, but I've never stayed in a yurt, so I was really looking forward to it. But 7 yurts were destroyed, and so I'm glad I wasn't there for that. But we would look at this storm, and we would look at what happened, and we would wonder, how can any good come out of this? I mean, this was supposed to be Trevor and Carol Ann's wedding day. Last night, they were to be married. But because of the storm that came in, because of the devastation that took place there up in Lenore, North Carolina, they're now going to be married here at 12 o'clock. And as beautiful as the ceremony is going to be, it pales in comparison to the beauty of where they were going to be, where they were going to become husband and wife. And again, we would look at this and we would say, well, what good could come out of the storm? So many times when storms come into our lives, all we see is the storm. We don't understand that God can work even in the midst of a storm to reveal himself to us. And so there are people here today, you've lost loved ones. Some of you have lost friends. Some of you have lost family. Some of you have lost coworkers. You've lost neighbors because of this storm. We wonder, how in the world could anything good come out of this? Well, last night, I found out that I just died. There, I'm back. Last night, I found out that one of the good things that came out of it is that the owners of the venue that they were going to be married at, the husband had gone to take care to make sure his mother was okay. And the wife got caught up in the river and the stream and everything. And Trevor actually saved her life. And had he not been there, that's a life that would have been lost. And so we see that there was some good that came out of that because lives were spared. Even though lives were lost, there were lives that were spared as well. And so when we look at the passage today in Luke chapter 8, verse number 22, it's a very familiar passage. It's one of my favorite passages to preach on. It's where Jesus is crossing over the Sea of Galilee. He's been ministering on one side of the sea, and he says to his disciples, we're going to go over to the other side. And if you don't know the full story, when Jesus gets to the other side, he encounters this man that had been demon-possessed. He was an outcast of society, and freedom comes into his life. But before that miracle takes place, there's another miracle that happens, and it happens right in the very midst of the storm. Again, some of you are facing storms you've never faced. Some of you are like us. We still don't have any power. We don't know when the power will come back on. Some of you are losing sheets of paper that are flying off podiums. I mean, some of you, you don't know if you're going to be able to go to work tomorrow. And some of you, you need food. I want to say to you that we're going to have volunteers over at the tent, that our food pantry ministry has got non-perishable items that if you're here and you need food at the end of this service, go over there, see one of those volunteers. They'll give you some food. But one of the things I want us to think about as we look at this passage of Scripture, and we look at how Jesus ministered to those disciples in the midst of the storm, we're going to turn over to the Gospel of Mark at the end, and I want to show you one verse to just remind us that in the midst of the storms, we're not alone. So look with me in verse number 22 of Luke chapter 8. It says, now it happened. For days leading up to Thursday, we had weather reports, we had news flashes, we had alerts going off on our phone telling us the storm was coming, the storm was coming. These men in this story had no idea the storm was coming, but the storm still happened. It says, now it happened on a certain day that he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, let us cross over to the other side of the lake. And they launched out. So many times when we look at passages of Scripture like this, we miss the gold that's there if we'll just dig out the gold. Now, these men, in just a few moments, they're going to find themselves in a situation they never thought they'd be in. They're going to find themselves in a storm they had never had a possibility of ever going into before in their lives. But they're going to forget something. This is what they're going to forget. Look at what Jesus says. he says, let us cross over to the other side of the lake. Jesus didn't say, let us try to cross over. Let us attempt to cross over. Jesus said, we're going to cross over. Let me say to you, if God has told you something is going to happen in your life, just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It may not be happening on your timeline, but it's still going to happen. If He's told you it's going to happen, it will happen. When Haley and I were blessed with children, we prayed for the salvation of our children. And in time, we saw them come to know Christ. There are some of you parents and grandparents, you're still praying for the salvation of your children and your grandchildren, and you haven't seen it yet, but if you just hold on to the promise that God has given you, that one day they will come to faith. He said, we're going to cross over to the other side. It says, but as they sailed, he fell asleep, and a windstorm came. There's no doubt in the midst of the storm, if you're like me, I was at home alone, and I could hear the storm outside my window. I could hear the trees creaking next door to the house. And it was one of those things, I would doze off, I would wake up, and it would seem like every time I would wake up, it would seem like the storm was just getting louder and stronger and louder and stronger. We had one of our families in recent days, when the storm was still in our area, they were trying to clear trees to get the road cleared to get to their home. As the father was clearing the trees, one of his sons came, and they were there working. And as they were working on clearing trees, 3 trees fell on his son's truck, no more than 10 feet behind where he was working. He never saw the trees coming. He never heard the trees falling. But they instantly made their way out of that area. And as they're making their way to try to get back home, all through the forest around them, they could hear trees falling one after another. Could you imagine the sheer terror? You're out there, you know the storm is there. You know that these 1,000-pound trees are falling all around you. And all you want to try to do is get to safety. These men have waves crashing all around them. This storm has now suddenly came upon them. They didn't have the warnings that we had. The only thing they knew is Jesus said, we're going to cross over to the other side. But Jesus falls asleep. And they begin to experience the storm like they had never experienced before, because it came down on the lake, and they were filling with water, and they were in jeopardy. If you know anything about the Sea of Galilee, you know that the Sea of Galilee is actually a freshwater lake. It's one of those things that's surrounded on either side by the Golan Heights, and the way the weather works there in Israel is that these massive cold fronts will come over the top of the Golan Heights, come rushing down the mountain into the Sea of Galilee where there's warm water, and these storms will just come out of nowhere. The sea that once, or a freshwater lake that once had been calm and placid, now has 6 and 8 foot waves on it. And these guys aren't out there in the daytime like we are. They're out there in the middle of the night. It's completely dark. It's been one of those things for the last 2 nights, being at home with no power, just the absolute darkness that's in our home. That this morning when I left to come set up chairs for us to have out here this morning, that when I walked out of my home, the sheer darkness that I've never experienced in our area. Because usually there's stars or there's neighborhood lights or the neighbor's lights. But they're there in the middle of the sea, miles from the shoreline. They can't see the other side. But the storm comes. And as the storm comes, their vessel begins to fill with water. And it says, and they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we are perishing. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. There's no doubt there were probably some of you in the midst of the storm. What you were praying for was for the calm. You heard, it's almost like you could hear the train coming. You hear the sound of the wind coming. You hear the sound of the storm coming, and you hear it coming. And all you can pray and long for is for the calm to come. But so many times in our life, the storms are not just like the hurricane that we faced, making its way up our area. But it's the storms of family crisis. It's the storms of economic insecurity. It's the storm of global insecurity. And my question for you is, in the midst of the storm, where will your focus be? Will it be on the storm, or will it be on the one that is there with you in the storm? Because let me remind you what you just sang about. He's a good, good Father. And we can sing these songs, and we can talk about the faithfulness of God, and we can claim all of these things, but when we find ourselves in the midst of the storm, that's when our faith has to become more than just lip service. We have to truly become a people of faith. These men have been with Jesus for years. They have seen miracle after miracle. They're just leaving an area where they'd seen miracles. But yet in the midst of their storm, how soon they forget. Because what do they say? They look at him, they awake him, and they say to him, Master, we are perishing. Not just the 12 disciples, but if that boat goes down, Jesus goes down. And if Jesus is the Messiah, as he's been preaching and he's been teaching, and these men have pledged their lives, they've walked away from everything to follow after Jesus, and now in the middle of the darkness, in the middle of the storm, the boat is going to go down, we're perishing. What are you going to do about this? Jesus, it says, he raises himself up. He arose and he rebuked the wind, and the raging of the water ceased, and there was a calm. But then he said to them, where is your faith? Let me ask you that question right now. Where is your faith? See, we've been getting these alerts saying that Spartanburg County has got a contract and they're going to clean up all the debris, and some of you are going to clean up your debris and you're going to put it out there on the roadside, and 3 weeks from now you're still going to be looking at it. And you're going to wonder, where's Spartanburg County at? Well, I don't know if you know this or not, but Spartanburg County is a big county. And there's a lot of people. And it's going to take some time. And there have been people for the last several days who have been wondering, why is it taking so long to get the power back on? Because there's an unbelievable amount of damage that's taking place. In the midst of us worrying about when are we going to get power back on, when is our brush going to be taken care of, we need to be praying for the linemen that are trying to get power to us. We need to be praying for the first responders that are trying to take care of us. We need to be praying for the hospitals that are overwhelmed right now. We need to be praying for our neighbors. I mean, think about this. Who is my neighbor? Right now, whoever needs you. A need known is an opportunity given. See, we're not having a night of worship tonight, but some of you, your night of worship might be you go over to that elderly neighbor beside you and you pull some of those limbs out of their yard. You go to that neighbor that you don't really like because their tree puts leaves on your yard, and my goodness, I didn't even think I had grass Friday when I went out to my yard. It was so covered in leaves. Now, the majority of them were mine, but it's one of those things. That neighbor that you don't like, that neighbor whose dog likes to fertilize your yard for free, that you got issues with, that you know they need a helping hand, guess what? That's your neighbor. That person that's struggling right now, that just needs somebody to encourage them, that is your neighbor. Who is my neighbor? Whoever the Lord puts in front of me. What is the need? Whatever he shows you. What is the opportunity? Whatever he gives you. The opportunity for you to pray with somebody. The opportunity for you to help somebody. Or the opportunity for you to tell somebody that can help them. Folks, this is when we as a community, we have to rally together. Next Saturday, it just so happened, next Saturday is Beyond the 404 Mission Day. It's a one-day mission day that we do multiple times a year. You need to talk to Annie Laurie Atkins. Find out how you can be involved. We had planned on being right here doing things with construction. Looks like we may still be right here doing some things with construction. But we may also be going out to some of those that are trapped in their homes. There's so many trees they can't even get out. So whatever the need may be that comes available to you, see that as an opportunity for you to be involved. See it as an opportunity to encourage somebody that's discouraged during this time. Jesus looks at those men after the storm is over and says, where is your faith? Folks, right now, the meteorological storm is over. But for many, the storm has just begun. How do we get our roofs fixed? How do we get power restored? How do we get this debris cleaned up? And then the amazing thing, it says, they were afraid and marveled. Now they were just in a storm, terrified that they were going to die. Jesus speaks peace, the storm goes away, and the text says they're still afraid and marveling. But they're not afraid and they're not marveling at the storm anymore. They're not afraid and they're not marveling that the waves aren't crashing in over the boat anymore. It says that they were afraid and they marveled, saying one to another, who can this be? For he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him. Let me tell you something. There's a good place to be when you find yourself fearful of a holy God. When you find yourself in a position of realizing that he is God and you are not. That he is all powerful and you are not. Folks, we have just in the last 48 hours, we've seen the amazing power that the atmosphere contains within it. But don't ever lose sight of who the God of the atmosphere is. The destruction that you can see for the next several months, let it be a reminder of just how powerful your God is. These men don't know what to think about Jesus. They've been with him for years. They've seen miracles. They've heard teachings. They know that he's the Son of God. But in their hearts and in their minds, they cannot reconcile what they've just seen to the point that it terrifies them. There's a holy fear and reverence that comes over them of who can this man be that even the winds and waves obey him. Folks, there's no doubt this storm has caught all of us off guard. We've heard reports that this is the 100-year storm. I'm so glad I won't be here for the next one. Let me tell you something. It's one of those things. I know my mama will see this later, but it just so happened that when the storm happened, that up on Atkins Road where I grew up, there was one poplar tree on the other side of the road from my dad's farm that when it fell on my mama's driveway. And so I'm trying to figure out how am I going to be able to get to Mama's? How am I going to be able to get help up at Mama's? And so I get on Highway 11 thinking that would be the clearest route to get there. And there were some trees that were down, but we made our way there. And then I get to the flats in Campobello, if y'all know where I'm talking about, where the Packlet River comes. Well, the Packlet River became Packlet Ocean. And so it's up over the flats, and it's going across the roads. And I don't know who the good old boy redneck was, but I saw a guy go through it. And I said, well, if he can do it, I can do it. I'm in my wife's Tahoe with the 22-inch double dub rims. So I go barreling through that thing. Halfway, I thought, this is how I die. That water was coming so strong, but I got through, and I got to my mama's. You know what I saw when I got there? There were 4 men already there working on that tree. My brother was there. Rick Sullins was there. Nathan, his son-in-law, was there. A man I don't even know who he was there. And for the next hour, we worked on cutting that tree up. Number 1, to get it off my mama's driveway. Number 2, to get it off the fence where the cows were so they wouldn't get out. But number 3, to get it off the road where people could get by. And so we had 3 chainsaws out there. We had a husband, wife, and son that came up. All of their names began with the letter R. As far as I know, I've never met them. They may be here. If you're here or you're watching, thank you for showing up. His Husqvarna, that thing would cut like a hot knife through butter. And we began to cut up that thing. And we would cut sections and we'd roll it in the ditch because now Spartanburg County's coming to clean up the mess. But the largest section, when we finally cut it off, we were fighting that thing to get it out of the road. And all of a sudden, we see this skid steer coming down, this front end loader coming down Atkins Road. Guy pulls up, gets out and says, y'all need any help? In my heart, I said, yeah, an hour ago. But in my mind, I said, absolutely. Can you push this last log? Let me tell you something. There should be stories like that every day moving forward until we get out of the mess we're in right now. That when you see somebody that's saying he was on his way to another job, but that man stopped to help us get that taken care of. There's going to be opportunities in the days to come for us to help people get things taken care of. These men have the ultimate source of things getting taken care of right there with them, and it was Jesus. If you got a Bible, I want you to flip over to Mark. Mark chapter 4, Mark also records this same story that Luke records, and I want to share this, and then we're going to wrap up the service. It says, on the same day when evening had come, he said to them, let us cross over to the other side. Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. Parents, let me remind you, there's some little boats that are with you. You adults, there's some teenagers that are with you. You Christ followers, there's some little boats that are with you in this storm. And they're watching to see how you're going to respond in this storm. They're watching to see what your testimony is going to be in this storm. That if you've lost a loved one, they're going to be watching to see how you respond to it. That if you've lost property, they're going to watch to see how you respond to it. If you go another week or 2 without power, they're going to watch to see how you respond to it. There's always people that are watching us. And for those of us as professed Christ followers, what they should see is who our focus is on. It's not on the storm. It's on the master of the storm. It's not on the disaster that's happened, but it's on the master that's still here while it's still happening. I love it that we got to start our service today praising the Lord together, seeing little JoJo take her next step of faith. It's amazing when you think about her story. About a year ago, she was a little boat in her sister's life. She was a little boat that watched her sister take her next step. that God began to spark something in her about where she was with her relationship with the Lord. And today we got to celebrate JoJo being baptized. And I'm not saying your next step is baptism. I'm just saying whatever your next step is, the benefit of you being obedient to that won't just be for you. Won't just be for your neighbors in need. It may very well be for some of those little boats that are watching you. Those little boats that are listening. And those little boats that are wanting to see who is the master in the midst of your storm.